I am a 32-year-old guy from Ohio who spent most of my life believing I was part of one of those stereotypical, all-American, tight-knit families you see in commercials. We were the kind of family that sent out matching sweater photos on Christmas cards, hosted 4th of July cookouts, and told everyone who would listen that we were blessed to have each other. That is the image we projected, at least. In reality, our family dynamic was built on one thing: me being the steady and reliable one, while everyone else floated through life like they were on an inflatable raft someone else kept pumping air into. Amanda, my older sister, is 35 and has been the golden child since the day she arrived. My parents acted like she had descended from a beam of heavenly light. She could do no wrong. If she slammed a door, it was stress. If she failed a class, it was the teacher's fault. If she broke rules, it was because she had a tender heart. Meanwhile, Kyle, my younger brother, who is 28, was the reckless one. He was the kid who crashed 3 cars, failed out of community college twice, and got into fights whenever he drank a little too much. Somehow, despite all of that, he was always forgiven. Every mistake he made was brushed off as youthful energy or learning experiences. Then there was me, the dependable one, the helper, the middle kid who never caused trouble and never asked for anything. I was the guy who drove dad to his checkups when his knees got bad. I was the one who quietly covered mom's overdue utility bill when her hours were cut at the grocery store, and she did not want dad to worry. I was the one Amanda always called when she needed a little help until payday, except payday never seemed to come. And I was the one my parents constantly praised for being responsible, but only in the context of explaining why everyone else deserved more leniency. Growing up, I swallowed all of that without questioning it. I believed family loyalty was the foundation of everything. I thought being the dependable one was a good thing. I took pride in stepping up when people needed me. But I was wrong about something important. Family loyalty only matters when it goes both ways. I just did not understand that until much later than I should have. Amanda had her first child at 19. The father was her high school boyfriend who ran off the moment she showed him the positive pregnancy test. My parents turned themselves inside out trying to protect her from consequences. They took over her bills, let her move back in, and talked endlessly about how strong she was for being such a young mother. Meanwhile, I was working 2 jobs at 21 just to make rent and keep my used car running. I did not ask anyone for help. That was not allowed for me. I was the reliable one. I was supposed to succeed without support so the family could focus all their energy on Amanda's struggles. When she had her second child at 27 with a guy she met at a casino, the story played out exactly the same way. The father disappeared faster than the first one. My parents treated it like a tragedy that needed to be handled, not like a pattern that required accountability. They talked about Amanda's tender heart as if that made her immune to adult responsibility. Meanwhile, every spare dollar my parents had went toward keeping Amanda afloat, and every time they fell short, they turned to me. They never said the quiet part aloud, but the expectation was always there. I was the dependable one. That meant I did not get to say no. By the time last year rolled around, the situation had escalated to a point that would have been absurd if I had not already been conditioned to accept nonsense as normal. Amanda met a man online, posted vague inspirational quotes about fate and soulmates on Facebook, dated him for 3 weeks, and somehow ended up pregnant again. At 35, with absolutely no plan, no stability, and no idea who the father was. And yes, I say that literally. No one knows who the father is. Amanda insists the baby is a blessing sent to her for a reason. My parents took that statement and ran with it like they had been waiting for someone to give them permission to delude themselves even further. They called the baby a gift. They said it was a miracle. They insisted that our entire family had to rally together in support. Honestly, the moment they used the phrase rally together as a family, that should have been my first warning. Nothing good ever follows that sentence in my house. The second warning came a week later when they invited me over for dinner and sat me down at the dining room table like I was being briefed for jury duty. My dad cleared his throat in that dramatic way he does when he wants to emphasize his authority and said he had been thinking about Amanda's situation. My mom nodded along and said she was worried sick about Amanda being overwhelmed. My dad continued explaining that since I had the best job stability in the family, I should help with the baby. Not in a general supportive way, not with rides or errands. They wanted money, real money. They listed hospital bills, nursery furniture, clothes, diapers, medical appointments, and then they said the words that made my stomach twist. They told me I would need to contribute ongoing monthly support. As if I had somehow entered into a co-parenting arrangement with my sister without knowing it. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline. There was none. I told them I could not just assign myself a child. My dad crossed his arms and said Amanda could not do this alone. My mom chimed in with what she clearly believed was a heart-wrenching plea and told me that I could not leave the family because they needed me. That was the exact moment something inside me snapped. I told them it was not my child and it was not my problem. My parents looked at me like I had slapped them across the face in the middle of Sunday service. They acted like I had committed a moral crime. They muttered about heartlessness and selfishness and how they were disappointed in my lack of compassion. I left before the conversation got worse. I thought the situation was over. I thought they would cool down, realize they had crossed a line, and let the entire thing go. I was wrong. 2 days later, I walked out to my mailbox, flipping through the usual stack of junk flyers and bills. And there it was. An envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front. I opened it on my doorstep. Inside was a short note that said, "Your share for this month," followed by a printed check request form. The amount at the bottom was $10,000. $10,000. For a baby that was not mine. From a sister who still owed me $1,800 from borrowing money 2 years ago for what she swore was a temporary emergency that turned out to be nothing more than her wanting to book a beach weekend with her friends. That was the moment everything clicked. That was the moment the blinders came off. That was the moment I realized my family had never viewed me as an equal, a sibling, or even a son in the normal sense. They had viewed me as a resource, as a wallet, as the dependable middle child who would never push back because that had been my role for so long. That was the moment I realized my family did not see me as a person. They saw me as an ATM with a pulse. Driving to my parents' house that afternoon felt like driving into a storm I had been avoiding for years. I held that ridiculous $10,000 invoice in my hand the whole way there, staring at it at every red light like it was physical proof of how far things had spiraled. When I pulled into the driveway, both my parents' cars were there, and lights were on in the kitchen. I walked inside without knocking, which is something they had always insisted meant we were a close and trusting family. As it turned out, it just made it easier for them to ambush me when they wanted something. My dad was leaning against the refrigerator when I walked in, arms crossed, jaw set, acting like he was about to shake down someone who owed him money. He did not even give me a chance to breathe before he started to open his mouth, but I cut him off by setting the invoice down on the counter between us. I kept my voice calm as I told him and my mother that I would not be paying anything for Amanda's baby, and that the very idea of them sending me a bill was unbelievable. My mom immediately launched into her explanation that Amanda was overwhelmed. Her hours at the daycare had been cut, and she was behind on rent. I told her that this was not my fault, and that no amount of guilt would make it my responsibility. Amanda stormed into the kitchen right in the middle of this, clutching her stomach with both hands like she was in some dramatic monologue for a Lifetime movie. She accused me of abandoning her baby before he was even born. I told her I was not abandoning anything because the child was never mine to take care of. She called me rich, selfish, and obsessed with money. I reminded her that she had asked me to pay her electric bill last month because she had forgotten and that being forgetful was not a disability. The second I said that, she shut her mouth so fast the kitchen went silent. But the silence did not last. The argument built again until Amanda threw out the sentence that stuck in my brain like a brand. She told me that if anything happened to her baby because the family would not help her, it would be my fault. She said it like she was handing me a threat wrapped in guilt and drama. What hit harder than the sentence itself was the reaction from my parents. There was none. They just looked at me like they were waiting for me to break the way I always had before. They did not tell Amanda she was out of line. They did not defend me. They just watched me like they were waiting for me to cave. I realized in that moment that there was nothing left to say. I walked out of that kitchen, out of that house, got into my car, and blocked all three of them before I even hit the main road. No long emotional explanations, no dramatic goodbye, I just cut the cord. For the first time in my life, I did not feel even a drop of guilt. It felt like taking a breath after years of breathing through a straw. 2 weeks passed without a single message from any of them, because blocking them meant they would have to put effort into reaching me. They did not. But my aunt, the unofficial family news reporter, had no problem letting me know through a text what was being said at church. Apparently, Amanda had been going around telling everyone that I abandoned the family and refused to help my unborn nephew. She made herself sound like a struggling heroine and painted me as the cold, money-hungry brother who deserted them. I did not answer. I did not bother defending myself. Anyone who believed her version of events was not someone worth fighting for. And then things took a turn. Not for me, but for them. 3 months passed in complete silence from my immediate family, which honestly felt like the longest stretch of peace I had experienced in years. During that time, I focused on my own life for once. I took overtime when it was offered. I caught up on sleep I did not even realize I had been missing. I stopped flinching whenever my phone buzzed. It felt like stepping out of a fog. Then, out of nowhere, my aunt texted me a photo. It was a hospital picture of Amanda holding a newborn boy. He looked healthy, pink, and perfectly fine, and Amanda looked exhausted but triumphant, as if she had just proven some grand point to the universe. The announcement under the picture said she was blessed and grateful. The next few hours, my phone lit up with people forwarding the same photo, because Amanda had apparently made a huge show of the birth online. The only thing missing from her post was any mention of a father. As expected, there was no name listed on the birth certificate, and the man who had helped create the child had vanished into thin air long before labor started. The state did not vanish, though. The state took one look at her situation and immediately raised questions. A chronically unemployed woman with 2 children already, barely scraping by, suddenly adding a newborn into the equation with no income, no support, and no stable housing, was a scenario that attracted attention. Child Protective Services stepped in, not to take the baby away, but to evaluate what they called family support systems. Amanda absolutely panicked over that phrasing. My parents panicked even more. Their panic, of course, turned toward me. When the CPS worker first met with my parents, they wasted no time selling a beautiful story. They apparently spoke about how strong our family bond was, how we always stepped up for each other, and how I, the dependable middle child, was fully committed to helping financially and emotionally. They did not just stretch the truth, they snapped it in half and rewrote the pieces. I did not hear about this fantasy until a couple of days later, when I received a call from a number I did not recognize. The person on the other end introduced herself as the CPS caseworker, handling Amanda's evaluation, and said she wanted to clarify details regarding my financial pledge. I felt my entire body go cold because I knew instantly what had happened. I asked her what pledge she was referring to. She said in the calmest voice that my parents had stated I had committed to regular financial support for Amanda and the baby. I told her plainly that no such pledge existed. I explained everything, step by step, in a tone so steady it surprised even me. I told her that I loved my family, but that I was not responsible for a child that was not mine. I told her that my parents had been attempting to place financial responsibility on me without my consent for months, and that the situation had escalated to the point of them sending me an invoice. She listened carefully and then said that I had every right to decline, and that they needed accurate information from the actual parties involved. There was no judgment in her voice, just professionalism and clarity. That one phone call shattered whatever fantasy my parents had tried to construct to make Amanda look more stable. Apparently, the fallout from that conversation hit my parents immediately. A week later, my phone rang from a blocked number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something told me to answer. It was my mother, crying so loudly I could barely understand her. She said Amanda had fallen behind on rent and was facing eviction within weeks. She said Amanda was overwhelmed and drowning, and that as her brother, I needed to help her. Then she told me the amount. They wanted me to temporarily pay $1,500 a month for Amanda's apartment until she got back on her feet. I felt nothing but a cold, exhausted certainty. I told her no. I told her it was not my problem to solve. I told her that temporary had never meant temporary with Amanda, and that I was done setting myself on fire to keep them warm. Dad got on the phone then, his voice full of anger, and he accused me of abandoning the family. I told him that they had abandoned me years ago, the moment they decided my value began and ended with my ability to pay for Amanda's choices. My words did not land as an insult. They landed as truth they had never wanted to hear. They hung up furious, enraged that their usual tactics no longer worked. My mother tried guilt. My father tried authority. Amanda, according to my aunt, tried painting me as some heartless villain who cared more about money than human life. But none of that mattered, because for the first time in my life, none of those things had power over me. They were furious, but they could not make me pay, and that killed them. This part feels surreal. I still find myself staring at the ceiling at night, thinking about how drastically life can shift when the scales finally tip the way they should have years ago. It has been 9 months since Amanda's baby was born. 9 months of relentless chaos for everyone except me. My parents are exhausted in ways that go beyond physical tiredness. You can see it in the way Dad flinches when the phone rings, the way Mom walks around the house as if the weight of every past mistake is lodged in her spine. Amanda is drowning in bills she cannot pay. Every overdue notice and bounced check has piled up like bricks, and she scrambles just to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. Kyle, true to form, has vanished 3 states away and refuses to answer calls or texts. He's done with the family circus, leaving the entire burden squarely on the shoulders of the 2 people who, until recently, thought they could orchestrate everyone's lives and count on me to bail them out when things went sideways. The entire situation is almost poetic in its justice. My parents, who spent decades funneling money and energy into covering Amanda's mistakes, are now gasping under the weight of it all. It's a quiet, heavy exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones. I've watched from a distance as hospital bills, late rent notices, and daycare fees multiply, each one a reminder that their choices have consequences they can no longer deflect onto me. For years, I carried the invisible burden of being the family's safety net. Now, they are carrying the burden they should have been prepared to face all along. Last week, something happened that I did not anticipate. Dad invited me to lunch. For a moment, I considered saying no. I had built months of space between myself and the chaos I once felt obligated to manage, but curiosity won out. I drove to the restaurant wondering if he would finally confront me with the same old guilt-tripping speech I had grown used to over the years. What I found instead was someone transformed. Dad looked older, weariness etched across his face in deep lines that had not been there before. It was a quiet humility, not desperation. Mom sat across from him, hands clasped, eyes heavy but clear. Amanda did not show up. She still insisted, to anyone who would listen, that I owed her something. I felt no anger. I felt no need to argue. I was just there to listen. Dad leaned forward, the tone in his voice stripped of ego, stripped of expectation, and said something that stopped me mid-thought. He admitted that asking me for money had been unfair, that it was wrong to assign me financial responsibility for a child that was not mine, and that the way they had treated me for decades had been a mistake. Mom, quiet but steady, apologized too. She admitted that they had loaded me with responsibility for too long, that they had failed to protect me, that in trying to help everyone else, they had neglected the one person who actually deserved it, the person who had always been reliable without complaint. Then Dad reached across the table and slid an envelope toward me. I could feel the weight of it in more than just its paper. Inside was a check for $10,000, the exact amount they had once demanded from me. But this time, it was different. Dad told me it wasn't repayment. It was recognition. Recognition for carrying more than my share of responsibility for years, for being used in ways they had never truly acknowledged, for standing up for myself when they expected me to fold. Recognition that I had been right to walk away when I did. Recognition that they had been wrong. For the first time in my life, my parents acknowledged my value without demanding anything in return. They did not ask me to forgive them. They did not try to guilt me into taking the check or into helping again. They just offered it as an acknowledgement that I had always been more than a family resource, more than a bank account, more than someone to bail them out when their chosen golden child created chaos. I did not cash the check. I will not. That is not the point. The check is a symbol, not a transaction. I kept it as a reminder, a quiet monument to the years of being taken for granted and the clarity I finally achieved. Because for the first time, they realized what they had overlooked all along. I was not their wallet. I was not a tool for covering up mistakes. I was the son they should have protected, the one they should have nurtured instead of exploiting. And now they understand that fully. And now they regret it every single day.